I don't know. The name of this tag is the tag that Pat tagged me in, and I wrote the questions down, but I didn't write down anyway. I'll put it in obviously the name. All right. So the first tag is a book that reminds you of your past, and I'm going to put the stories of John Cheever, not because it's like my past. I wasn't a businessman in the 1940s who, you know, commuted on the Metro North. But this is a book that I was given by someone or other when I was in high school in the 1980s. And there were some stories in here that were just fascinating to me. Um, did I read the whole thing then? No, I didn't. But I read several of the stories, and I mean they were just so evocative. Um, I've always remembered this quote from the preface that I was going to look for it and read it to you, but they actually pull it out and print it on the first page like it's a blurb. Um, these stories seem at times to be stories of a long lost world, when the city of New York was filled with a river light, when you heard Benny Goodman quartets from a radio in the corner stationery store, and when almost everybody wore a hat. Here is the last generation of chain smokers who woke the world in the morning with their coughing, who used to get stoned at cocktail parties and perform obsolete dance steps like the Cleveland Chicken, sail for Europe on ships, who were truly nostalgic for love and happiness and whose gods were as ancient as yours and mine, whoever you are. How about that? Most of the book is not like that, but what a great introduction. Doesn't that make you want to read this? So I had a copy just like this. I think this is a pretty ubiquitous, easy to find mass market paperback. And then I reacquired it. I was like the early 90s. I was commuting into New York on the Long Island Railroad every day. So I was like, hey, this is the time to read some John Cheever. And I read through this entire collection while riding on the Long Island Railroad, which is not the same as the Metro North, let me assure you. And I was not a powerful Don Draper esque businessman. I was quite a flunky. But I mean, even then, this was the 90s. It seems, um, well, it is remote in time now. So it does raise some nostalgia for me, remembering some of the things from that period of time that are no more or that are just memories. So there you go. The stories of John Cheever, not just something that reminds me of my past, but something that I recommend to anyone who likes great short stories. The Swimmer, you probably have heard of The Swimmer, which is great. There's the World of Apples, I remember, Farewell My Brother, and all kinds of good stuff. And if you're a fan of Mad Men, you should at least read a couple of them because the fact that Don Draper lived in Ossining, and that's where John Cheever lived, you know. Let's see. Next prompt: a book that is set in a place you want to visit. Book that is set in a place you want to visit, but have not yet. Um, I don't know if I'll ever get to Japan, but you can't really see this too well. This is Yasunari Kawabata's A Thousand Cranes. This is a very slim novel about a young man and his father's mistress, who maybe becomes his mistress. There is a lot of talk about Shenoyu, the Japanese, I think that's what it's called, tea ceremony, and pottery, Japanese pottery, the ceramic, you know, water pitchers and teapots that they use in the tea ceremony. It's you know, it's a book, not a lot of plot to it, a lot of description. It's kind of slow, but so beautiful and sad. Also, there are details in here about, you know, how it is to have a uro ceremonial tea house in your backyard, your back garden. You think about them. In this book, there's a scene where the one of the female characters is like planning to start using this little little shed for tea ceremonies again, and she's out there, scrubbing the mildew out of it. It's like you don't think about that when you see the picture postcards of, uh, you know, meticulous Japanese gardens. These things aren't used all the time, obviously, right? You can't just pop out to the your little tea shed and have a shenryu without preparing first, right? So let's see. That is once again Yasunari Kawabata's A Thousand Cranes. Um, okay, a book set in a foreign country that you admire. I do not admire countries. I admire civilizations. I admire people. I admire works of art. I don't admire countries. Uh, so I don't have an answer for that. Okay. A book that is set in the city, province, district where you live. So I live in North Carolina. There is a fellow named Martin Clark who writes legal thrillers, some of which are set in the actual city that I live in, but I've never read any of them. I had a copy, but like the tea shed in A Thousand Cranes, it got mildewed, so I never read it. That was Martin Clark's The Many Aspects of Mobile Home Living. He's written a handful of them, a good dozen maybe. And I'm not a big legal thriller guy, but anyway, there you go. So I'm not recommending that because I haven't read it. I'm going to talk about Cold Mountain. Summer on Sterling Reads was talking about this in her recent video about favorite books, how she's trying to figure out maybe what her favorite book is, and this was one of the candidates. So Cold Mountain, if you're not aware, by Charles Frazier, was a something of a sensation in the 1990s and was made into a film with Jude Law and Nicole Kidman. Um, it's a historical novel set at the towards the end of the Civil War. The main character, there's two main characters. One is a woman named Ada who lives in the mountains outside Asheville. Near Asheville, North Carolina. So Appalachia, Blue Ridge Mountains, and her betrothed, who had to go off and fight in the war, was injured, and finds himself at the start of the story in a hospital in Raleigh, and he leaves and decides to walk home. So he walk. Raleigh is I don't know. It's several hundred miles from the mountains, so he has a long walk. Obviously, you're going to think of the Odyssey, and it is something like the Odyssey in that it's a man traveling to get home after a war. He's not a victor. He's on the losing side. He's also being hunted part of the way by these agents who go around looking for Confederate deserters to punish them, basically by summarily executing them. And a lot. He goes through places that I've been, places that I've lived. He has stories of some different characters. In particular, the ones that interest me were Stowbrood and Pangle. Stowbrood is a sort of ne'er-do-well who was the father of Ruby, is her name, who is a neighbor of Ada, who moves in with Ada, and they kind of establish housekeeping in the absence of any men. Uh, Set up their chicken operation and their gardening and figure out how they're going to keep body and soul together until the end of the war. So Stowbrood Ada's father is kind of a drunk, kind of a no good Nick, and he was in the Confederate Army, but he's mainly become a fiddle player, kind of late in life. He didn't used to be a fiddle player, but he becomes fascinated by fiddle music. He makes his own fiddle. He kills a or he doesn't kill a rattlesnake, but he gets the rattle off of it and puts it in the through the F hole of the fiddle, which is something that a lot of the folk fiddlers in Appalachia would do. Um, and a lot of the stories and descriptions of the old time music, the fiddle and banjo playing in this book, are from sources that I know. So Charles Frazier clearly knew some old time music and at least listened to it and read some of the same books and liner notes and things that people that were people even earlier had compiled about this stuff. So there are. This is a copy where I made a list of all the references to old time music and where I thought they were from. There's a story about Stobrod after he's been fiddling for a while and he gets summoned to the bedside of a young girl who has burned herself very badly and is probably going to die. And it's quite moving. It's also taken from the life stories of Tommy Jarrell, who was a fiddle player from the Round Peak area of North Carolina. Probably my one of my very favorite musicians of all time, and someone who I wrote a good deal about when I was before I retired from ethnomusicology. Pangle is something, and so Pangle kind of becomes a universal fiddler. Charles Frazier sort of applies a whole collection of folklore about fiddlers to Pangle, or rather to Stobrod. Pangle is the banjo player who is intellectually disabled. We would say maybe I'm not sure how he's described here, but he's not neuro divergent. He's yeah, and but it doesn't stop him from playing the banjo. In the movie, the actor who plays Pangle, the banjo player, does not do the singing that Pangle does. He has a very beautiful singing voice, which comes from a gentleman named Riley Bogus, who lives not too far from me, and I see him around sometimes. He provided the vocals in the movie. So anyway, Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. Let me see. I wanted to read it just a little bit of this description of them playing. I think it was. Got so many different places. Okay, 366. Sorry. This is fascinating. Watch me mutter to myself. I honestly don't know. Okay. Yeah. So this is Stobrod and Pangle. They've been captured by Teague and the band of agents who were rounding up Confederate deserters. Stobrod bowed a note or two from Cindy. That's a tune. And then some other notes, seemingly at random, unrelated. He went over them, and it began to be clear they made no sense. But he suddenly gathered them up and worked a variation on them, and then another yet more precise, and they unexpectedly fell together into a tune. He found the pattern he was seeking, and he followed the trail of notes where they led, finding the way of their logic, which was brisk, brittle, effortless as laughing. He played the run of it a time or two until Pangle had his chord changes down and had spun off a series of quick answering notes, bright and harsh. They set off together to see what sort of thing they had composed. Though it was neither a jig nor reel, it was yet right for dancing. Their stomachs, however, were still in such a rage that neither of them could have shuffled out a step. Pangle, nevertheless, had one foot patting on the ground on the offbeat, and his head was nodding, and his eyes were loose closed, so that there was but a trembling rim of white showing between the lashes. Stobrod, I mean, this is really, if you played banjo and fiddle duets, this is just a wonderful description of some of that. So, Oh, there was there. Where'd it go? Okay. Pengel's use of the thumb on the fifth string and dropping to the second was a special thing of arrogant wonder. It was like ringing a dinner bell, yet solemn. I don't know how solemn it is, but that's a wonderful detail for banjo players. Anyway, Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. I probably talked about it far too long. Let me see what the next tag is. A book set in the future that you think is the future is going to be like. I don't know. It's on the computer. I'm sorry. So it's sad to say. I'm going to say the Octavia E. Butler books, the Parable of the Sower and the Parable of the Talents. Yeah. Make America Great Again. Oh boy. Anyway, so thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later. Bye.